the Chinese grow, huge amounts of and produce large amounts of agricultural products just like the United States does. But because their population is so much larger, they still must import. So we're really both food superpowers, and we have a lot we can learn from each other.
Welcome to the Crop Science Podcast Show. My name is Brian Arnell, and I am coming to you from Oklahoma State University. And today I'm happy to have Dr. Karen Mancl. Dr. Mancl is a Professor Emeritus Food, Ag, and Biological Engineering at the Ohio State University and Fellow of the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars. She is a nationally known expert in onsite wastewater treatment, having conducted research, written, and taught the subject for 40 years. Dr. Mancl is the past president of the Ohio On-Site Wastewater Association. Karen, I'm so happy to have you on today, and I'm looking forward to getting to know more about what you're doing and really where you're at, because you're not at the Ohio State, you're in Washington, D.C. Can you share with the audience a little bit about, what you're doing right now?
Well, I'm excited to be here as well. Yes, as you said, right now I'm in Washington, D.C., and I've accepted a research fellow position from the Smithsonian, and I'm working in the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars. The center is a living memorial to Woodrow Wilson, who was the only president actually to have a PhD. And he was very involved in international affairs as president, so this seemed to be a fitting memorial for him. And with my fellow position, I'm doing research on U.S. and China agricultural collaboration. I first went to China in 2006, leading an exchange that was sponsored by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Ministry of Agriculture in China, and it was a rural environment exchange. And I was lecturing about my favorite subject, on-site wastewater treatment. And the timing couldn't have been better. The Chinese were just really starting to focus on improving the quality of life in the countryside. So they were making lots of investments in rural infrastructure, and were really looking for, the type of information they needed. They were setting up labs. They were creating, different types of research projects and building, field demonstrations. And I was, able to begin collaborating right away with some of my colleagues in China. And it's been such a wonderful experience.
That's fantastic. And I don't think as the listeners would view, or at least I didn't until I was there, can you give a little bit of insight of what rural China looks like? What is that? What is rural China? What is agriculture in the region you're discussing, and what's kind of the societal approaches in that area?
China has 1.4 billion people, but the country is about the same size as the United States. So, while we have about the same size, there's so many more people. And at least when I began working there, about 50% were in the countryside. So the population of rural China is more than the population of the United States, which is only, under 400,000 people. So, there's a huge population in rural China. The other thing that's really interesting in comparing the two countries is our agriculture. Our agriculture is shaped differently because of the size of our farms. In the United States, the average farm is 444 acres. And in China, the average farm is 1.6 acres. So they're more like, big gardens. So a tremendous amount of labor goes into agriculture, caring for those very small farms. One of the things that fascinated me when I first went to China in the early 2000s was how, even with their huge population, and their agriculture that they've been practicing for, close to 5,000 years, they were able to feed themselves. They were able to grow enough food to feed everyone in the country. Sadly, that is not the case now. and food security is a huge issue in China. Another important thing to recognize is that China's, because they aren't able now to grow enough food to feed themselves, China's become the United States' largest market for our agricultural products. So our two countries are both, food superpowers. The Chinese grow, huge amounts of and produce large amounts of agricultural products, just like the United States does. But because their population is so much larger, they still must import. So we're really both food superpowers, and we have a lot we can learn from each other.
So in that realm, can you describe the importance of U.S. and China, both academia and agriculture working together? Because, in today's society, you might miss the importance of that, but it's a really important thing. And from all universities, I know many universities that go, I spent my own time there. We've had a recent faculty member that spent 6 months in China. We have a lot of close ties with China academia and China agriculture. Can you kind of share more upon the importance?
Oh, easily. So, a lot of people are, expressing concern when they talk to me about my work, about the competition between the United States and China. And so, I looked that up. What's the definition of competition? The definition of competition where two or more, individuals or groups are going after the same thing. They want the same thing, and only one can win and the others would lose. So that would be competition. So do we compete in agriculture is the question that I asked. Well, what does Chinese agriculture, what are the drivers of Chinese agriculture? Well, as I mentioned, food security is a primary driver for Chinese agriculture. They, are striving to increase their yields, increase their productivity, so they're able to feed their large population. And there's another driver of Chinese agriculture, and that is poverty alleviation. If there is poverty in China, it tends to be in the countryside, in the rural areas, and they look to agricultural activities to bring people out of poverty. So poverty alleviation and food security are the drivers of Chinese agriculture. What's the driver of U.S. agriculture? Well, in exploring that, it's pretty much markets, because we produce a lot of agricultural we have a lot of agricultural productivity, more than we need. And when you're producing a perishable product, you need to be able to move it and sell it pretty quickly. So U.S. agriculture is always looking to open up markets. And as I said, China is a huge market for Chinese, for the United States, and soybeans being our number one export, and also some meat products. So it's an opportunity really for a win-win. We're not competing in agriculture because we don't want the same things. So they can achieve food security and we can achieve, gain in new markets, and both win. So it's a wonderful area where we don't compete. And so it very much opens up the opportunity for collaboration.
And so somebody, I guess, rephrase this to make sure that it's said properly. In essence, that collaboration, if we can boost the food security and boost the rural society of China, we would expect them to purchase more, bring in more soybean, bring in more meat products. And so therefore our exports could increase because they're more secure, they're more able to provide for the families. And so therefore the incomes of each individual farmer or group is actually improved. And as we improve income within a family unit, we usually see an increase in the purchase of proteins and higher value items, correct?
Exactly. And so what I'm doing here in Washington is I'm studying these agricultural collaborations that have been going on for, more than 40 years. So the first time I went to China, I went on a U.S. Department of Agriculture, Ministry of Agricultural Exchange, a formal exchange program that was actually started with an agreement signed in 1978. And from 1978 on, more than 2,100 U.S. agricultural scientists have traveled to China. and a similar number of Chinese have come to the United States to learn from each other. And it was an incredible opportunity. And as I said, it gained, opened doors for me to really expand my research that benefited rural Ohio and the rural U.S. as well as rural China. So it was a real win-win. So sadly, that program is now idling, and it began idling in about 2018. In about 2018, the Chinese started to pull away from this exchange, and then the trade challenges that we've had with China really, from our side, really caused it to cause us to pull away. And then when the pandemic came along, it really, has chilled the relationship. So I was looking into the history of it. And one of the things I've learned as I've been going through the National Archives, where a lot of these documents are, I learned that actually our agriculture exchanges started sooner than I even knew. They started in the early 1970s, when the United States and China didn't even have diplomatic relations. We didn't have embassies. We had no relationship. And there was some behind the scenes discussions going on between our national security advisor at the time, who was Henry Kissinger, and China's premier, Zhou Enlai. And they were talking about how could we, start to have, some type of a relationship. So I read those transcripts of those discussions, and what were they talking about? They were talking about Moscow, they were talking about the Middle East, and they were talking about Taiwan. These were some of the challenges at the time. And so as they were going through these discussions, they said, well, maybe we could sign some kind of a agreement to just start to build a relationship, not diplomatic relationship. So they negotiated this agreement that was called the Shanghai Communique. And in that, Kissinger said, one of the things we could put in the Shanghai Communique would be like technical scientific exchanges. They're not very diplomatically important, but it's something that we can do. So they wrote that into the agreement, that we would exchange send groups of scientists back and forth. And one of the other things that the the Shanghai Communique did was it opened up the door for trade. At the time, we had zero trade with China. And as soon as that Shanghai Communique was signed, what was the first thing that the Chinese started buying? Agricultural products from the United States. And they sent a little bit to us, but the trade with China was very, very much one way. We were sending a lot of agricultural products to China, and that really, really opened the doors for that. So the first exchanges were started in the early 70s. The first group of Chinese that came to the United States was an insect control team, because they were very concerned about managing insects. And then we sent our second team that we sent to China a couple of years later was another insect control team. And what our U.S. scientists found was the expertise that the Chinese had developed in integrated pest management. They were the experts at it, and they were doing things that we had never, ever dreamed about. So it very much informed and inspired our entomologists that with the Chinese coming to the United States, and that was a very, very successful exchange. And as we formalized our diplomatic relationship, those two groups really continued to collaborate and improve the insect control in both countries. The very first team of U.S. scientists that went to China was in 1974, and it was a plant science team. And boy, you look at the names on that list of the 10 men that went to China, And it was a who's who of the Green Revolution. Norman Borlaug was one of the members of that team. And when they got there, they were so surprised with what they were seeing. And the plant breeding, the goals of plant breeding in China were so different from the goals of plant breeding in the United States. So it was definitely an opportunity to learn from each other.
This is absolutely fascinating. Today on the show, we have Dr. Karen Mancl. She's fellow Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars. And Karen, in your topics, we're talking about the U.S. China climate leadership and agriculture. How is that relationship now? I mean, we've moved, so you mentioned in 2018, things were going down in that relationship. The pandemic kind of put a really good stop on some of the stuff that's happened. What's the current outlook for the relationships, both academic and agricultural?
Well, as we said, the relationship between the two countries is a little tense right now, and our diplomats are looking for anything to reopen a dialogue. So we were very successful in getting a small grant from the Department of State to look at, could climate and agriculture be one of those areas to open up a dialogue as one of these non-competitive areas, because we don't compete in agriculture and we don't compete in climate. This would be a great area where we could look for win, win, and win solutions for both countries, where we could all gain and all win. So as we hear with my investigator here at the Woodrow Wilson Center is the director of the China Environment Forum, Dr. Jennifer Turner. Dr. Turner and I, went down this road looking at areas where we could collaborate. And that's where we came to the three that we made in our final recommendations in our report. One is in soil and carbon sequestration in soil, because I really don't think the United States and China compete in soil. And the second area that we're proposing is in rice. Rice, as it turns out, of all the grains, is the greatest greenhouse gas emitter. So we grow rice in the United States, but the Chinese really grow a lot of rice. And both are looking at ways that we could reduce greenhouse gas emissions and using very different approaches so we can learn a lot from each other. And then the third area that we proposed was in food waste. A third of food that's grown, on planet Earth never is eaten. And as it's rotting and decomposing, it's emitting methane, which is a powerful greenhouse gas. So we both countries have policies addressing food waste, taking very different approaches to reducing food waste. So that's an area where we could collaborate. We're not competing in that area, and we could learn from each other to reduce these three potential sources of greenhouse gases that are affecting, that are tied to agriculture and food supply.
Well, I think those 3 points are quite interesting. Two of them I have, I work in often, I guess you would say, on conservation and the greenhouse gas of rice. If I look at the conservation aspect of China, I see China having both an easy and a hard road to hoe as it comes forward to implementing conservation strategies as we think of them, as far as tillage and stuff, such. In one realm, they have small plots. That 1.1 acre size means that each unit can be managed independently. So we have some spatial resolution, and it's a lot more hand labor, but we also have a very historic system of management. And so, I guess, what's that look like on the small shareholder to implement these strategies? And because to me, I look at it as like they have to change. As you mentioned earlier, 5,000 years of agriculture. They've been plowing, using ox. It's not a large mechanical. Going to no-till is not just we're into no-till. It's a much more challenging. How does that look, and how are you guys addressing that?
Okay, so when we were looking at conservation agriculture as practiced in the United States and in China, these are, some of the things that we learned was, what was the motivation to start conservation agricultural practices in the United States? And it was the Dust Bowl. So, we did a lot of things wrong, and it caught up with us and bad things happen. And then we, adjusted our policy. So we adjusted our policy and created the Soil Conservation Service and started to develop the practices of conservation agriculture. So today, about 30% of U.S. farmland is, being farmed with some type of conservation practice, whether it be no-till, cover crops, or some of the other conservation agriculture practices. So we have about a 30% adoption, and the policies that help to support that are the carrots. We have EQIP, and that's a really important program for U.S. agriculture. And then there's a new program that's just begun on climate smart commodities. So that's encouraging not only adoption but also the marketing of products that are being produced in ways that reduce greenhouse gases. So opening up markets, because remember, markets is our driver. So those are some of the policies that are helping us there. When you go over to China, their agricultural practices are different from ours, and that's why we have the opportunity to learn a lot from them. And conservation agriculture has been a challenge for them. Only less than 5% of agricultural land in China is in conservation agriculture. So there's a big push right now, especially in the grain areas of the country, to start to move toward no-till. The big problem in China is they did not have the equipment. The no-till planters that were developed in the United States starting right after the Dust Bowl, are available in the United States, but there in China, that equipment's not appropriate for these small farms. So they had to develop their own equipment. So I've gotten to know the professors at the Chinese Agricultural University who were doing that research, and they have now developed small no-till planters. I asked him, well, what type? And, is this for oxen? Is this for small tractors? Is this for, and his answer was yes, for all the different types of approaches to cultivation, they've developed these no-till planters. So now the next step is in getting teaching farmers how to use this equipment and encouraging them to use it. So their extension system is different than ours. So they're, working through their extension system, and also the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy in the United States has been very active in promoting conservation ag practices. Well, the Nature Conservancy is also active in China. So I've gotten to know the director, the woman that does this work in China, and they've learned that it takes about 3 years to convince farmers to move from their conventional form of tillage into no-till, and it starts with demonstration projects. So the Nature Conservancy has been setting up demonstration plots in the grain regions of China and holding field days and giving them a chance to see how this works. And then they have been purchasing these no-till planters and making them available at the village level, so that they don't have to own one; they can just borrow one. And then what they're finding is that at first they'll take a small area and try it. Very similar to U.S. farmers, that they'll try it first, but they have much smaller farms, so sometimes their test plots are much smaller than than ours would be. And after they get they see the impact, then they're ready the third year to fully adopt. So they see about a 3-year adoption cycle. They're finding, though, that the most challenging for the farmers is the attitudes of their neighbors. The standard for the appearance of a field in China is it needs to be very tidy, very, very tidy. And when you're in no-till, it's not.
Sounds familiar to the States, right? I
Yeah,
mean, the
yeah, it's
term
not that
trash
different.
farming was developed
Yeah,
when we first had no-till. That's funny.
exactly. And there's accusations that this person's lazy, that they're a lazy farmer and that they're not out there plowing. So that's part of this, re-education. And so they're on their way now. They have the equipment. That was a big obstacle. So now that the equipment is available, now it's educating the farmers and getting over some of the social pressures. um, the other big challenge, though, in China is crop residue. Farmers don't waste anything in China. And that was some of the things that or very early exchanges, those first plant scientists that went over there, they wrote in their reports, wow, they don't waste anything. So crop residue has a use. So it was used as fuel. It was used for building materials. It was used as animal feed. It was used as bedding. It had tons of uses. So leaving it on the ground is a challenge. And then another thing is because they were so focused on integrated pest management, they recognized that some of these pests, their eggs, and they can harbor in the crop residue. So by collecting and burning, or collecting and getting the crop residue away, that reduced the pest burden. So that's another challenge in leaving crop residue behind, is it's kind of counter to the practices of integrated pest management.
Working in similar systems in India, that was a question that came up, and at the time there was no solution. We're looking is that if we're taking a feed or fuel stuff that is traditionally expected, how are we supplementing that? So was there a decision on how to supplement the loss of feed or fuel in the China system?
Yes, actually. Um, and that's with biogas production using human and animal waste. Um, when I was a student back in the many moons ago, during the energy crisis, back in the 70s, during the energy crisis, there was a lot of research money available to work on anaerobic digestion and biogas, because fuel prices were, going through the roof, and there were the lines at the gas stations. So I worked in a digester lab and was analyzing manure and all that fun stuff. It was a very glamorous job that I have. And but within a few years, when Alaska opened up and the embargo was over and fuel prices went back down again, the funding dried up. And I've even looked into, I've actually graphed it. The number of papers that were published went down to almost zero within 5 years after all this happened. So everybody that was doing this research shut down their labs. Well, in China, they had the same challenges. Fuel prices were going up, and they were looking for alternative fuels. So they opened the Biogas Institute in Chengdu in the 1970s to do anaerobic digester research. But that never shut down. They never shut down. They kept going. So their research in anaerobic digestion and biogas generation went on continuously. And one of my dear friends was a director there. And they just kept learning and learning and learning. So the implementation of biogas digesters, where in the United States we have a few hundred agricultural biogas digesters, in China they have 40 million. 40 million. So if I want to learn about biogas digestion, that's a good place to go, because they have really mastered it.
They have it.
And the reason, some of the motivations for this was they were losing a lot of their forest cover for firewood. And you can't cut down a tree anymore in China without a permit because of the challenges that they experienced with deforestation. So biogas was an alternative to firewood, and burning crop residue. So indoor air quality greatly improved. I've been in kitchens in these villages in rural China that have these biogas digesters, and it is so clean. And the women just are thrilled to have a gas stove instead of having to be burning corn stalks or,
Between the ash and the smell, and there, I mean,
oh
that
my
was one of the
goodness.
first lessons I learned, was that going to small shareholders and saying, you have this wonderful source of nutrients in the manure, and like, well, what are we going to put in our stove?
Yeah,
Like, you can't, the way that these small shareholders use everything. And when you said everything, the audience needs to know, you mean everything
yeah,
has a purpose. Manure may be a nutrient, or it might be a fuel source. Those corn
exactly.
stalks might feed, and it's always amazing to see the utility that they can find in those scenarios.
Yes, indeed. So that has really changed the environment in rural. So for us, looking at the economics of anaerobic digestion and biogas, well, the fuel doesn't really pay for it,
Mm-mm.
but there's the multiple benefits. They look at it as improved health, improved indoor air quality, forest protection, the opportunity to keep crop residue on the ground and improve soil quality, and the fuel. All of that together flips the equation the other way and makes biogas pay. So that's why you see so much more adoption in that country than we do in ours.
It's time for our famous three. Explore the future of agriculture with KWS, a global leader in innovation and sustainable farming practices. Uncover the exceptional qualities of our hybrid rye, cultivating a legacy for a greener tomorrow. Visit kws.com/US for more information and for dealer locations. KWS, seeding the future since 1856.
This is fascinating. And Karen, I can honestly say I think I could talk to you for the next 2 hours, because I just enjoy this conversation so much. We've really only got one of your three key points, but we're at the end of the time, and I want to respect your time. So thank you so much for coming on to this today. As a final wrap up, the three questions we always ask our guest, what is a work resource that you often go to?
I get some wonderful newsletters every morning, when I turn on my computer. So in education and in engineering and in the environment. And I check those every day and just am inspired and get leads. And that's been a habit of mine, checking those newsletters every morning.
Now, the second question, what is your favorite leisurely activity? What do you do in your time off? Because I'm sure you have so much free time based upon what I can tell.
Well, I love to sew, and I like make quilts, and that came from my childhood, where I grew up. I'm the oldest of a family of 8, and we had to use every scrap. So I used to take all the scrap fabric and make quilts, and that's, believe it or not, a leisure activity for me now. And I also restore old homes. So I own a couple of 100-year-old houses, and I like working on these old homes.
Oh, that's fantastic. What's the oldest home? What's the oldest house that you've restored?
The one I'm living in was built in 1925. So it's just at 100 years old now.
That's
Yeah.
absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
I love that. Finally, where can people go? Where can the audience go to find out more about what you're doing, what you have done, and what you're doing now?
Well, at The Ohio State University, I developed a lab there called the Soil Environment Technology Learning Lab. So our website is SETLL, for the Soil Environment Technology Learning Lab, .osu.edu. And all of the articles I'm writing about my work in U.S. and China are at that site. All of my wastewater treatment work is there. I'm worked as an extension specialist. All my extension publications are there. So setll.osu.edu, where we don't treat soil like dirt.
I love it. I love that tagline. That's as a soil scientist, I appreciate that greatly. All right, so thank you so much for joining us today. Again, we have Dr. Karen Mancl, the fellow of the Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars. Folks, if you enjoyed this podcast, please hit subscribe, share it with your friends, or even folks that you don't consider your friends. And if you have any comments or suggestions, please leave that in our box. And we always want to know who you want to hear from as far as guests are. Karen, thank you so much. This has been just absolutely lovely. I can't tell you how much I appreciate getting to know you better today.
It was a pleasure.